How are you enjoying your evening so far? Yeah? All right. It is my pleasure to introduce the headliner of this evening. We saved the best for last. I'd like to introduce why we asked Jonathan Allen. And basically, I stumbled upon an article that he published, I think 4 or 5 months ago, about the Cloud Business Office. And I was very intrigued by the concept of organizing your stakeholders in such a way that they would meet frequently. There would be a cadence. And that was what I found very interesting. And I actually tried to apply that in one of our projects. So I think I read the blog article 4 or 5 times because it's a lot to digest. And we'll send the link afterwards after this meeting because it's a very good article. So hopefully you will share some of your experiences. I'd like to welcome on stage Jonathan Allen, former CTO of Capital One and currently enterprise strategist at Amazon Web Services and also cloud evangelist, of course. But who isn't a cloud evangelist?
Yes, that does work. Well, good evening, everybody. Firstly, thank you very much, Bart, for that introduction. Hopefully I can do it justice. But thank you for inviting me back. I spoke here, it was probably 18 months ago, 2 years ago, something like that. So firstly, just a little bit about me and the team. So I actually joined back in 2000 Capital One Bank as a principal software engineer. And I was in Capital One for 17 years, and it was an absolute pleasure to work in Capital One. Learned a tremendous amount. You could say I grew up in Capital One Bank. And I was privileged to work in a whole host of roles across infrastructure, application development across the bank. And in the last 3 years of that journey, I became divisional CTO for the UK. As Capital One progressively adopted Amazon Web Services in its business. And Capital One has gone on to frequently speak about that story. And what I now do as of May 2017 is actually, I found myself sharing the story so much. Because as professionals, as leaders in our own right, we're actually sincerely interested in the lessons learned. We want to understand how other people have done this. We want to learn from who has gone before. And I found myself sharing the story. And then there's a unique team at Amazon Web Services called the Enterprise Strategy Team. And that team of 11 of us now is entirely comprised of predominantly C-level leaders who have led a transformation across people, process, and technology to adopt Amazon Web Services cloud. Because you pick up a heck of a lot of learnings on that journey. And it's interesting, by the way, listening to the previous 3 keynote speakers, I see a lot of sort of shared lessons learned. But what I'm going to sort of share with you now is what is Amazon Web Services ever learning of what works best with this paradigm of stakeholder management. So first of all, let's just, there are millions of customers using Amazon Web Services. And over the last 22 months in Amazon Web Services, it's been my unique privilege to work with actually hundreds of those customers directly, predominantly the leadership teams, who come to talk to Amazon for a whole raft of different reasons. Every single person brings something different. But I am yet to meet an executive committee that is not very interested into agility, growth. Because when you look at the executive committees themselves, they're interested in actually 3 or 4 things. They're interested in mergers, acquisitions, divestitures. They're interested in growth. They're interested in operational governance. This is what executive committees are talking about and they want. And we find that there's a raft of reasons why people want to move to AWS cloud. And in many of them, this is how they operate today. I have been there. I have managed many waterfall projects. And when you think about why we delivered that way, it makes a lot of sense. When you are running on premises, you are going to have teams that get very good at database, Windows, network, Linux, storage, backup. And they are going to want to deliver in this way. But the problem is, guess what? We have all these defects. Sometimes it can take years to deliver value. That does not speak to that agility question that is on the minds of leaders at the executive committee level, the line of business leaders. And one of the paramount things I get asked all the time is, how can I go faster? How can I innovate? And I'm always a little troubled, and this is me speaking freely, when there's like a head of innovation, because it's everybody's right to innovate. All of you in this room have the right to innovate. Nobody owns the monopoly on innovation. It's your right to do so. And when you go on that journey, typically people want to get to market in 90 days. I wanted to get a product to market in 90 days and test an idea. And what I see coming over in a vast majority of situations is people moving to small, heterogeneous, skilled teams that are aligned to line of business owners. Sounds simple, doesn't it? But here's the problem. This is what we call the frozen middle. If you are an engineer or an architect, you are probably extremely good at doing that, and you take a lot of pride in doing that. I did. And when you look at what motivates us, generally motivates us as humans, it comes down to three things. We want to do our job how we want to do it. If we need to go home at 3 o'clock as a parent because we've got a responsibility or a doctor's appointment and we want to come in an hour early, we want to be able to do that. We want to be really good at what we do. If I've been racking and stacking hardware for 20 years and installing operating systems and running it as a Linux engineer, I'm probably exceptionally good at that. And purpose. I want what I do to matter. Now, when you go to cloud, you can actually mess with all three of these things. These people might not want to go into these small, heterogeneous skilled teams. They may be very happy in their other team. This is where things stall. And by the way, training is just the tip of the iceberg. Very important, but it's a tip. And I'm going to come back to 12 steps, which actually I think work to break this iceberg down. Because based on the fact of my experience of running teams, of running a cloud business office, of running a cloud leadership team, when you solve this equation in humans and you find ways to get people excited about each one of these, they will help your goal of transformation. So let's look at what AWS right now does in this area. Well, we are learning all the time just as well from those thousands and millions of customers. And right now, we actually start with a construct called the Cloud Leadership Team. The thinking has moved on from that blog. Okay? Then we have the Cloud Business Office, and I will come onto this. Then we have Cloud Platform Teams. Is CCOE still a valid model? Absolutely. Is it just having a Cloud Business Office still a model? Absolutely. Right? Whatever works for you works for you. But here are some of the things that we've seen work really well, really quickly, with extremely large enterprises going to cloud. So let's dig in. First of all, do not procrastinate. Do not think that I have to have the perfect governance model to move to cloud. It takes a few seconds to get going, to start testing. But time and time and time again, we have found having an appropriate single-threaded leader take the mantle is extremely important. Now, in highly regulated institutions like financial services industries, you may be aware that they typically operate something called 4 lines of defense. The first line of defense is the operations folks. This can be the COO, the CIO, the CTO, ultimately the CEO. They are the leaders that are empowered to make the decisions, to accept or mitigate risks in accordance with the risk appetite. These make the very best type of single-threaded leaders. So when I have conversations about agility with executive committees, and the CEO hears the stories of extremely large organizations having phenomenal success, driving for digital innovation, lowering their costs, yeah, they often want to pick up this mantle themselves. And here's what really works. You've got to declare a bold objective, whatever that is for your business, whether it's get minimum likable products to market in 90 days, whether it is reducing cost, whether it is improving reliability or your security bar, whether it's moving a site, closing a data center. What is your bold objective? Now, in Capital One, I had Rob Alexander as our global CIO. He stood on stage at Amazon Web Services reInvent in 2015 and made this declaration. And I was just a few feet away of those at the front of the audience. You don't get to do that when you're an employee, by the way, anymore. It's customers only in the keynote, so I have to sit in the back and watch it now. Take on that single-threaded leader role. It's got to exist. But then put together the leadership team, because you've got to bring your stakeholders on this journey. So what do those stakeholders look like? And by the way, there's a reason there's a two-pizza team here. Does anyone know what a two-pizza team is broadly? I'll share it with you. This was a phrase coined by Jeff Bezos in the early 2000s, where all teams in Amazon should be only big enough to be fed by two pizzas. These are American pizzas, right? I did this talk in Italy last week, and they were very confused. This leadership team should be no bigger than 10 people. Because you know what? It's just human nature. When we go beyond that as a team, it's not one team anymore. It's a team and a half, or two teams. So keep it to about 10 people. And there's some key people that have got to go on this journey. Procurement, right? It's been said before. The contract is different. This is not a huge CapEx-intensive contract. This is pay-as-you-go with no minimum commitment. It's a very different type of contract. So they've got to go on that journey of understanding that with the leadership team. If you come to them at a late stage, you're going to spend that 3 months, as somebody mentioned, chasing your tail. Legal. They've got to go on that journey with you as well. Don't cut them out. Don't bring them in at a later stage. Embrace them. Your Chief Information Security Officer, of course, if she or he is not bought into this journey, it's going to be a tough battle. Of course, the finance officer or a representative. You're now moving from a CapEx-intensive world to an OpEx-intensive world. Now, I would argue, having run delivery, run operations, I'll take that every single day of the week. I'll take cash flow and decisions to invest in more team, to develop more features, than having a depreciating asset on my books forever. Head of infrastructure, she or he will normally own 51% of the vote. Right? They are the ones that are woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning when things go wrong at the moment. Right? They've got to be involved and bought into the benefits. And very often, some of the conversations with this individual go, when the truth, well, what am I going to do now? Well, I'll tell you, your role is about to get a heck of a lot more exciting. When you're no longer endlessly upgrading hardware in the data centers, when your engineers and you are now part of building product in 90 days or less to your customers, that's a heck of a lot more fun. No, your engineers, fingers on keyboards engineers, technical architects, they can get really good at building cloud. And you know what? What I've found in these organizations, as they're successful on cloud, suddenly the business demand to do more goes up. So that demand on talent goes up. So if you are technical, as we all are, we've gone through those inflection points in our career when technology has changed. This is just another one. It's an extremely powerful one. And there's a lot of fun to be had on the other side. Head of delivery. This is where you're bringing in your line of business owners. These are typically the folks that are passionate about the investment monies and what they want to do. This is where you bring your LOB leaders into the conversation. Engineering, if you have this function. Risk leader and audit leader. If you are a regulated entity, you do not want to bring your second and third line team into the conversation late on. You need to bring them in from the start. And HR. We are going to be, as I looked at that frozen iceberg, people are going to be going on an inflection point and a change journey. HR need to be in there with you. And you know what? When you bring these folks together, They need to meet weekly. Because they're all going to have questions. You need to get to a cadence. They need to attend. That team needs to raise and discuss what are risks, what are not risks, what are blockers, how are we going to remove them. Ideally, meet bi-weekly. But guess what? Boy, are they going to have a lot of questions. Do not ignore anybody's question. When I started on the journey to AWS, I knew very little about Amazon Web Services. I was embarrassed about how little I knew. I had a lot of questions. And to be honest with you, I was embarrassed to ask them. People have got to feel secure in this team to ask questions. Because understanding and appreciation of some of the objectives is super important. And if people don't know, they are afraid of it. It's just human nature. We are afraid of what we don't know. End of story. So you demystify it. And the best way to do this, having done an awful lot of EBCs in my time, these executive briefing visits in Seattle or in country, this is when you can go as deep as you want to go. And typically people want to talk to us about the adoption framework, the well-architected framework, the migration acceleration program of the thousands of enterprises that have migrated. What are the lessons to learn? But then there's a whole host of other topics people want to dive in on. Security. Doing a leadership deep dive on security with this group at an appropriate level is super important. That reassurance that they actually understand how this works, particularly for the risk and audit leaders. And then here's something else I challenge the leadership team to do. If you want to affect change, well, unless you've been clear on your principles, don't expect your engineers, your developers, your senior managers to be clear either. And if you haven't put a principle in place, they will fill the vacuum for you. So the leadership team should agree at the high-level security objectives. They should agree on the team you have is the team you need. A lot of organizations go, right, we're going to hire all new people. I'm like, wow, I did that. I tried to do that. I remember writing a unicorn job description and placing it gleefully into the market to be met with profound inbox silence. The team you have is the team you need. They just need a path, encouragement, recognition of their change curve. My change curve's half a second long. Right, some people's is 2 years. Now, if you want to know more on this, on principles, I've actually gone around the world collecting them. And some customers have kindly gifted some really good ones here. And I've also gone across Amazon. Amazon is principle-led. From our 14 leadership principles that are used across all 600,000 plus Amazonians. I can talk to any of them about customer obsession, invent and simplify, diving deep. They totally know what it is. If I'm late for an internal meeting, because a customer wants to spend that extra hour speaking with me, nobody would ever dream of complaining about that, even if I missed a meeting with Andy Jassy. That runs through. You need to agree your principles. Now, these principles, and this is a Amazon Bitly link, have a read. They won't be perfect for you, but they are very thought-provoking on cost, on security, on availability. As a leadership team, you need to declare them. Now, here's another one, right? Trust but verify. That's super important if you're moving to small heterogeneous teams. You can't just trust them implicitly in a highly regulated organization. You've got to have a mechanism to verify. You've got to get your preventative and detective controls just right. And by the way, everybody starts up turning the controls to 11 because you can. And then you're like, actually, what's appropriate? How do we have this team, this small team, just focus on access for what they need? But we still may need segregation of duty within that team. You can still do that. Segregation of duty is on a unique login level, not within a team level. So super important principles. What does a cloud leadership team do? I normally never, ever do this on a slide, ever. Right? I never do this, because who can read this while I'm talking? But these are some of the things. Again, I'm going to show you the link where you can go to this. This is what the cloud leadership team needs to actually do. Let's take a look at them. A bold goal. OKRs, objective and key results. KPIs are super important to track progress. Creating those first agile teams, agreeing on the training and reskilling agenda, super important. Signing off the cloud contract, providing budget for that first team. If you don't provide budget at the leadership team level, the first time you try to get a team together, guess what? You're going to have a problem with priority. That big upgrade that's coming along will take resources. Well, unless the leadership team are behind it, it will. And then communicate. You either fill the void or it will be filled for you. And then, you'll notice I've not actually created the business office yet. Why not? Because the leadership team trusts its own team first. You guys, the architects, that's who the leadership team trusts, and quite rightly. So having them actually set up the cloud platform team, super important. So the product manager needs to come in here. Now, for your first team, I'd probably say this is somebody best, probably from IT. Somebody who has really strong EQ skills is a must. Right? They've got to be able to deal with 1,000,001 questions from other teams, and they've got to be positive and encouraging. High emotional intensity is required. They're going to actually take on all functions of the Cloud Business Office before it's being set up, because they need to educate the leadership team on cloud. Then guess what? You need an architect. Now, when I started on my journey, I had a really good architect who knew a lot about cloud. I was extremely lucky. But guess what? Architecture has never been more important. But how you do architecture has never been more important. The days of an ivory tower of architecture, I think, are coming to an end. I think far better to have an architect here who can not only see the broad, holistic technical picture, but can also be fingers on keyboard. Can help use the tools to help solve problems, to remove bottlenecks when teams are stuck. It's all very well having multiple different teams, but I guarantee they're going to be dependent on each other. You need an architect to glue that together still. So architecture has never been more important, but how you do it has never been more important. Infrastructure engineers still have an extremely important role to play in this journey, and their job's going to get really fun. In my experience, the best engineers on cloud, Linux engineers, network engineers, coders, anybody familiar with a command line, they make the change, right? When you're building infrastructure as code, that's just a big cron job to them. Right? But what they need, again, is a pathway on how to learn the new, and I'm going to give you some hints and tips on that in a minute. Security engineers, right? If you're trying to do this without the CISO's office involved, you're not going to succeed. You need a security engineer who can come into this team. And speaking freely, this isn't a tick box engineer. This is somebody who can technically understand the different ways of securing cloud. How does IAM work? How does security groups work? How do NACLs work? How are we going to use KMS consistently, the key management service? Because ultimately, you've got to set your objectives for security. And you know what? Those security objectives, when they're defined, need to be elevated to the leadership team so the leadership team understand them, not sitting on a policy document that no one's ever read before. Operations engineers. These folks understand how to patch and maintain. They understand how an application is glued together. They understand the telemetry around it. Typically, they're involved in batch operations, ETL operations. Super important role. Don't cut them out, bring them in. And then, of course, you can bring your application engineers here. So what we've done here is we've brought every type of skill together. Now, I also found I needed network engineers and firewall engineers when I did this for the first time. The goal here is to have a team that is self-sufficient, Because the breakthrough I had on my journey, and I see around the world, is for the first time, Agile becomes a reality when this team can self-service themselves with APIs. End of story. The moment you touch hardware, things slow down. The moment you're dependent on another team, you know that very first waterfall diagram? Things slow down. That Agile team becomes blocked. If you've got 12 people that are blocked, it gets expensive really fast. And one of the really interesting KPIs I've seen some companies do is clock up the wasted man time because they're blocked by another team and bring that metric to the cloud leadership team. That provides an interesting conversation. That's why the leadership team need to be set up first, ideally, so that they can have that. And that will be a robust conversation at the leadership team. And again, I never do this, but I know it's important to you. So what do a cloud platform engineering team do first of all? Well, these are some pretty good things. Right? Establish those security objectives, those first landing zones, consistent code repository. Availability objectives, hugely important as to how you use the different mechanisms you can in AWS Cloud. Get that first production workload over the line. Establish the IAM. Because guess what? This cloud platform team, after it's done this, needs to split. Okay, you can't just have one team. It won't scale. Cloud becomes how you do business. Every team needs to be able to self-service within the agreed guardrails for your business. Now, you still may have a cloud operations team that ensure consistent Amazon machine image at gold, consistent infrastructure as code, consistent pipeline principles are adhered to. That might still be necessary, but I would argue the best transformations we've seen worldwide are when this team actually splits in two and more people come in. And then they go through a learning curve, and I'm going to show you. Actually, let me talk about it now. So when you've got this, let's go back a slide. When you've got this team together, how do you reskill them? Now, the first time I put a team together, I would best describe them as gifted amateurs in cloud. Right? Don't get me wrong, they were experts in their own right, but you end up with a lot of how does good cloud look like? So with this dilemma in mind, that I want a team of experts, and in fact I want thousands of experts, how do I scale this? And I was really lucky at the time that I went to have a lot of conversations with different providers. I was met with a cast of thousands. And then one provider came in to talk to me. Sorry, Bernard, it wasn't you, but we did have that conversation. It was a company called CloudReach. And I remember the founder coming in and going, you can have one engineer. And I'm going to put that one engineer into this team, and then we're going to do pair programming. So obviously, for those of you that are not familiar with pair programming, this is a concept from extreme programming. This is where I'm going to have one machine, 2 keyboards, 2 mice, 2 monitors, and together 2 engineers are actually going to, from the bash shell, build infrastructure as code. That was like putting rocket fuel in the team. Because then you're not in a training classroom, you're actually building for live. So this individual now spends days with everybody in that team showing them how to do infrastructure as code. Then you've got something to live, then you split the team. Now, something else I've seen happen here, and it's been proven out at many organizations, that when you go forward like that, some teams get really good at it, and some teams don't. What differentiates them? In every situation I have seen, it is when the organization or that team themselves have both encouraged and challenged themselves to pass the AWS certification, starting normally with the AWS Associate Architect. Bit of a clue there, right? The architecture course is extremely powerful. It's a tough exam. But you know what? 50% of that exam, security. In Capital One, my old alma mater, there are now thousands of certified engineers who hold that certification. So for years, we've talked about everybody being a security engineer. I saw it was interesting. It was like the first priority of security awareness in the CISO's presentation on that list, right? Yeah, it always will be. But you know, when you've got everybody taking that exam, and they understand the security because they've had to pass an exam, suddenly you're making a huge, profound change in your security bar. And here's an interesting fact. I remember being at a keynote and standing in front of a fair few hundred people and going, well, this is great, I'd like you all to get certified. And sure enough, somebody in the front row went, that's great, when are you going to take the exam then? And I mumbled a quite poor example answer and walked off stage, and I was actually very annoyed. And I went home, thought about it, and like all of us, I'm juggling 85 balls at any one time, right? Both professionally and personally. Where am I going to find the time to do a course? But I booked the exam, and every night at 10 o'clock, I went and used a Cloud Guru, an amazing training service, Cloud Guru, if you've not found it. Online training, went through the sessions, used my personal account. This has nothing to do with production. This was my personal account. And did the modules, took the exam, and I passed. Now, a pass is a pass, so I'm not going to share my pass mark with you. But that's not happening. And you get emailed a certificate afterwards, for those of you that have done it. You gentlemen there, you said you'd done the specialty course. You get emailed a certificate with a number on it, and at the next town hall meeting, penultimate slide, I did the whole one more thing, and then put my slide on, and nobody believed me. Of course, there's a number that's lookable, so referenceable, so they can go and look up. That really enforced change. And then we did everything we could to encourage certification. We'd pay for exams. We'd buy a Cloud Guru Enterprise license. We'd give you classroom training. Vouchers. We'd give you a global roster of honor. If you passed more than one exam, you go higher up. Boy, you'd see how competitive that got. You've gamified it. What a great mechanism. Then you can start scaling your teams. Then you're not even talking about cloud anymore. This is just how you do things. So that's training and reskilling. That, by the way, that sort of mechanism, that thaws the frozen middle. And then, again, I've talked about this, bringing in a partner. There is no compression algorithm for experience. Whether this is a partner that's in the room or AWS ProServe, it really matters. Okay, you can spend a long time grasping it, or you can go really fast. And of course, there are thousands and thousands of AWS partners. And then this is where that first platform team needs to help educate the leadership team. This is the job of you all in the room, I would argue. Get clear on these 5 things, because these are a mystery to the leaders in your organization. You know, when the CISO previously was saying, I didn't really know about cloud. Yeah, I didn't, and I put my hand in that, and I was the CTO, and I didn't know about cloud. I needed help to be educated. So let's just take a quick deep dive into these things that you need to be really careful and mindful. Cost. Get clear on your objectives. This is a real-life example from Edmunds.com in America. They completed their all-in migration a few years ago now, one of the largest car retail websites in America. This is what their on-premise costs look like. This is after they moved. And this is with generally accepted accounting principles here. This is very different. Pay as you go is very different. There is a responsibility of the team now. If you've previously centrally paid for costs, having the teams understand if they turn things on, they pay for it. If they turn it off, they don't. That's really important. How about those teams pay for that? You know, how about you move the budget to the teams? That ownership will drive a lot more frugalness. Security. Okay, this is the shared responsibility model in Amazon Web Services. I would politely argue everybody needs to understand this, just at this level. The AWS is responsible for security of the cloud, the hardware, the network, the physical assets, the security guards, all the way up to the hypervisor if you're using EC2, all the way up to containers if you're using the K8s, even higher if you're using serverless. But it's your data. You want to say who, when, where, and how that's protected. That's the blue bit on here. That can be intimidating. Okay? But again, do that security deep dive. Here's all the security tools. Security will forever be job zero for Amazon Web Services. We will not hesitate to move teams away from developing features if we feel that isn't where it needs to be. And compliance, it's come up a lot. I spent a long time on compliance programs. In regulated entities, it's hugely expensive. Well, do you know what? Benefiting from these compliances that AWS has already achieved, that saves a heck of a lot of time. PCI compliance. There are a very large number of services that are PCI compliant. If you're running PCI workloads, far better to leverage that QSA status and just focus on the very upper level that you need to make sure is compliant. You can do that. Again, people need to understand that. And then availability. All of us have seen these sorts of charts, right, for years. How many 9s do you want? Okay? Have you ever actually looked underneath it? You know when you put electricity, the network, routers, switches, servers, the hypervisor, all stacked up, all in serial. Doesn't matter if you've got n+1 at different levels. They're all in serial still. This is the equation. You know, when you put those together, this is where you end up. That's not very good. This is why we still have outages. Because the truth is, everything fails all the time. Everything. We can't avoid it. It fails all the time. Amazon.com learned this lesson many years ago, which is why the region model with multiple availability zones is so crucial. This changes things completely. Now, when you're running entire zones that can have one or many data centers within them, now the equation changed completely. This is where I'd rather be. So now, when you're running your applications in 3 availability zones, when you're spreading your data securely, encrypted, it's got extremely high durability then across those availability zones. The CEO of Santander Open Bank stood on stage at the AWS Madrid Transformation Day last year and talked about how they now proactively fail entire availability zones for their stack and test that it can carry on. So you know when the previous presenter was talking about no more surprises, this is chaos engineering. This is proactively testing. This changes everything to do with high availability in DR. And it's really important the leadership team understand how this works, because this can make you incredibly efficient. And then, of course, the services. As engineers and developers, and I am just as guilty as this, I have a tendency that I want to build. I know, I'll build my own container platform. I'll build whatever, I want to build it. Because I'm an engineer and developer. This is your right if you want to. Absolutely your right if you want to do that. If you want to run it on top of EC2, you can absolutely do that. But I would argue if you want to go really fast, having your small heterogeneous teams focus on 4 things. Business logic, data, the interface, whether it be human or programmatic, and security, because security is job 0 for us all. So using these in the right way can help you do that. Let AWS take the burden for different things. Do you really need to build that API gateway on top of EC2, or do you leverage the API gateway as a service? It's your decision, absolutely, it's your decision. But do you really want to be maintaining the API gateway or delivering that functionality for your line of business customer? I'll take the LOB, I'll take the functionality every day of the week. That's really fun. I am well over on time. I do apologize. So coming into the final things. So this is where now we set up the CBO. We've got that first team going. Now we want to programmatize it. We want to make it bigger. This is where the CBO. And we start to see the CBO and the cloud platforming engineering teams becoming this cloud enablement engine. This scales. This is how you get to hundreds of DevOps teams just using cloud and delivering. So let's just take a quick click, because I'm conscious of time. Architecture alignment, no surprise to you guys, that's there. Right? That consistent architecture alignment still needed. And again, those architects need to be very close to the teams now. Product management, again, project management offices aren't going away. Having that LOB involvement is still really important. Delivery management, if you're moving now to something like scalable agile framework and a cadence of 2-week sprints, 3-week release trains, that is a change curve you're going to go through. Financial management, as I've talked about, onboarding, training, change management, these all matter. This is now when you've got your cloud business office running at scale. And finally, that blog that Bart kindly referred to, this is the bit.ly link to it. If you want to take a picture of that, please be my guest. I'm sure Bart will also send out the link to it afterwards. This is actually going to probably be amended soon to recognize that we're always learning. We're always learning, and it's a pleasure to learn with you, our customers. And with that, I want to say thank you very much.